Tayo, you're on your website, or I mean, you say a lot that you grew up in 5 countries, 4 continents. Could you briefly just give us like a run through of your childhood and upbringing? You know, what countries you lived in, and you know.
Yeah, yeah. So I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, October 30, 1989, and then I was there for about a year, little under a year, and then my dad got posted to Sweden, so we went there for 2 years, and then my middle brother was born right there. We came back to Nigeria, and I spent about 8 years there doing elementary school, in and out of all the dictatorships. I stayed there under General Ibrahim Babangida and General Sani Abacha, and then Sani Abacha died of a supposed heart attack, and it was met with jubilation actually because he was a horrible dictator, but that signaled this transition to civilian rule finally, because we had been on the precipice of that for a long time, and each dictator kept falling in love with power. So General Abdulsalami Baka in 1999 was a transition military ruler who passed it on to Olusegun Obasanjo, who himself was a former military ruler. But in 2000, that opened the door for more opportunities for my dad, because now, there was, we were now getting less sanctioned internationally. So my dad was a diplomat, so we started getting posted. So we got posted to Vietnam, to Burkina Faso then, where I spent most of my middle school. And then I did 6th grade to 9th grade there. And then I came back to Nigeria. Well, in Burkina Faso, I was in an American international school in a French-speaking country. And then I came back to Nigeria for my high school, where I went to my version of Hogwarts. I went to boarding school from 10th grade to 12th grade. I was grateful to have the opportunity to be head boy, but I wasn't Percy for those Harry Potter fans. I'm such a nerd. I love that. And then my dad got posted to Vietnam, and when I graduated, so I went to Vietnam briefly, but I applied to school in Virginia called Liberty University, and then I got my visa in Vietnam because the whole family moved there. I went to Virginia, and it was back and forth between Virginia and Vietnam, and then it became Virginia and Nigeria. And then yeah.
And your father was a diplomat? Is he still a diplomat now, or what's he doing now?
He's retired.
Right.
So yeah, he's at home in Nigeria.
And how many languages do you speak? You're moving around so many times. What languages did you pick up?
I wish I spoke more. I speak French. I speak English. I do speak a bit of Spanish and my tribal language, Yoruba. Of course, English. But yeah.
How well can you speak your tribal language?
It can be more fluent, but it's something this is to identity. This is going to be a good question. Something I started learning more and more. So I'm actually taking lessons. In fact, after this, I have a lesson scheduled, and the reason why is as I grew older, identity was so it was very fluid for me, and going home a lot of times. I know my parents did this out of love, but I always joke with them and say, hey, it's not like I was gonna forget English, but they would say, well, we want you to focus on this so that you wouldn't have to worry about that. And English is the official language in Nigeria, so you still speak English, but they didn't put as much emphasis on teaching me that language. But every time we came back home, a lot of our extended families would be taking those funny jabs, like, oh, you sure he's Nigerian? All these things. And as I've gotten older, I've been tapping into more and more of Nigerian culture, because the most ironic thing is I found myself even being seen as more Nigerian abroad than I ever was. And it's something I've leaned into and owned more, because the narrative around Nigerians is very limited. Narrative around Africans is very limited. And connecting to Yoruba, my culture, as I'm a writer and storyteller, helps me to actually understand more of who I am. So I started taking lessons early this year, but I also started working on my second book as well. And one part of what I'm working on my second book has a lot to do with my identity growing up as a Black on all these continents. So yeah, it's something I'm growing. So right now it's enough to understand, but it's going to be more fluid maybe by the time the episode comes out. So yeah.
Nice. And was it difficult to find is it a private tutor you have for this tribal language?
Yeah, and it wasn't. I mean, the internet now makes it easy. So I looked up Yoruba lessons online, and I looked at a few, and then there was a platform that was doing that, and same thing I did when I was learning Spanish. Listen to as many podcasts as I can. Okay. There are some apps, and then you just try to make it part of your day. And one thing I'm doing is I know my mom knows I'm doing this a little bit, but one thing I want to do is gradually surprise them with like a full arsenal of the language, and they're like, "Hey, where did you know the language?" I'm like, just a little something.
You just pick it up.
Yeah, let's pick it up. But that is what I want to do. I want to surprise them. So my mom knows I'm picking it up a little bit, but I don't think my dad knows. So I think it would be a bigger surprise for my dad. And I'm like, nice. I'll just you speak to me in English one day. I'll just go, hey, Professor Yoruba, Nisi, Professor Yoruba now, right now. So, but yeah, I'll just go. Yeah.
Is there anything that you learned about yourself whilst learning your tribal language? Was there anything new that you learned about yourself?
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people of color and Black people are learning. There's power in the story. I think growing up, especially in textbooks, you get used to seeing all these mythologies and everything being assigned to Greeks and Romans, and I'm a huge fan of that. I know a lot about those mythologies as well, but the way it was told, you don't even understand it. We have our own creation stories, we have our own gods and goddesses, and we have our own things, and it was a sense of pride, honestly, just to see that there was that. And it also allowed me to, I'm a researcher, so as I was learning language, I was researching some of the the warriors and the kings and queens and royalty in the area, and you just realize how much pre-colonial history isn't taught. And it was a lot of Yoruba people, they don't just exist in Nigeria. There's so many all over the world because of colonization. Obviously they forced us into the country, but there are some in Togo, some in Benin, some in Brazil because of enslavement, scattered around different parts of here, Cuba. So that's what I was learning. It was the history of that, and it was a sense of pride that came with that.
Yeah, I think, it's true. I think when you learn language, it's impossible to separate it from history, I think. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned colonialism. What do you think it's Nigerians' youth's attitude towards, Nigeria's past in colonialism? Do you know anything about what the current youth think about that, or do they know much about it?
Yeah. I mean, that part is taught, pretty much early on. Why you speak English. Why parts of Western Africa speaks French and all that. And I believe that the younger generation is becoming more individualistic, right? So Nigeria itself is a collectivist country, much like other African countries, which, the emphasis is on, it's on us, we, which I don't think there's any good or bad way, but there's a lot of family and pride in that. But with the access of internet, with the access of a lot of people growing up in the diaspora as well, you start to learn a lot of your identity. And even with what's been happening in the pandemic and in the world with the racial pandemic as well, and storytellers that are coming on Netflix and all these shows, people are starting to really get in touch with this at a much earlier age. And so when I talk to people younger than me in Nigeria, they have more of a sense of their history than I did at that age. And it's very good to see. It's very good to see, just because it means that I feel like we're going to continue to dismantle some other systems of oppression.
That's really encouraging to hear. Thank you for telling us that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And having grown up in so many different cultures, is there a particular culture that you're most familiar with or most comfortable with?
To Anthony's point about language, Burkina Faso, a French-speaking country, you get very familiar with French. So now whenever I hear something French, I perk up, and you learn a little bit about that. But with that, there's also the colonization attached to that. So
Sure.
I grew up understanding, the British influences, the Commonwealth, right, and also the some of the French as well, which is subtle, but it's also interesting where there's a lot of that goes to France. But the other thing that I picked up on is how influensive. Is that even good? Is that how influential? Shoot, sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
It's influential. How influential the American culture is. It is. When I was a kid, it's just not something I was conscious of. You just, it's like Hollywood, go there. All the music goes there, all these things. And now, as many people are on learning what has been toxic in different cultures and what has been acceptable in different cultures, you start to see why many people can do the American accent and why a lot of Americans maybe might not be able to do the other accents as well, because a lot of the things exported tend to be American, and a lot of what gets to America doesn't always end up being from other cultures, or if it's in a different cultures, it's not the same way. And it's an interesting study on power structures and what we normalize as standards, everything from beauty standards to reality TV to what we consider a hero versus a villain or the arc. And that has been the most interesting thing to watch for me, especially if you were watching with the politics that's been happening recently. And a lot of countries are asking themselves, oh, wow, that can happen here too. I didn't realize that could happen here too. Because I always thought about the idea versus reality. And I think there's now people are starting to understand that the same foundations exist everywhere. But if you don't continue to be intentional about who you want to be as a nation or as a country, cracks can exist everywhere. So those are things that I learned, and I started learning that because I grew up in a dictatorship. So I was always fascinated with why there were cracks in leaderships and what fueled those dynamics in dictators' mindsets and why it had so many followers. So I've been studying that, and it's interesting seeing the different changes.
Yeah. I never lived under a dictatorship. Is there any difference between living under a dictatorship and living under a democratic environment, or is there really not that much difference at all? Or is it very subtle?
There is a difference. I will say that, and the big difference is in how you can talk and the freedom of speech. So I've been very vocal about not being a fan of the last administration here, right, in the United States. Now, when I was younger, I knew early on what not to say, who not to say it around, and I have always been, kind of a a person that might talk more than the person would like to. I like to call out things sometimes, but my parents were very firm, about all these things because it really meant life or death, depending on who you talk to. There was that, sometimes you deal with curfew or martial law. Sometimes you just didn't know. But at the same time, when I was growing up, I had normalized that trauma so much that it wasn't until I got to the United States that I even started to unpack it. Because in my head, I just got used to having scarcity and fear mindsets of certain things. And so when I would travel to different countries, I would just be like, okay, I got here, I got there, do this. But it wasn't my personality. It was just a personality that I had adopted to be safe. And so when I was applying for jobs, right, in the United States and all these things and getting all these no's and all these things, at first I didn't understand why I was getting no's because I thought I did everything I was supposed to do. It's supposed to work here. But as I started to really understand some of the different structures or different things, I started to find my voice more and more with my platform. And I would say it. And my parents at first reacted the same way. Like I was in dictatorship. You're talking too much. Why are you writing about this? Why are you talking about this? Don't you know this can happen? And I had to, and I would pause. I was like, are they right? And I'd say, no, like I'm not I don't live in a, that's not what I'm living in and in my head. And so when I started to do that, I asked myself a lot of the questions of who I was and what did I want to say. So it's the freedom of expression and freedom of self that's different. But outside of that, it's yeah, and it's I don't know that there's any. Well, then you have the vile dictatorship, the debts and the human rights violations. But that goes without saying.
Right.
Unfortunately, that exists, and you know, because I remember seeing a lot of, there were so many killings, right? And people that I admired were always speaking in exile. So, they'll say something and then yep, they got on the plane to London or to something. I was like,
Right.
what? So that's a big difference too. Yeah.
So I was reading your Twitter, and recently you tweeted that you have to be careful when studying trends, patterns, and history, because sometimes in an effort to be successful, you become harmful perpetrators of what you're studying. Do you mind expanding on this a little bit? Because I found this really, really interesting.
Well, thank you for reading my tweets. It's a little bit of you know, but you know, in line with what I was saying earlier, people create rules for comfort a lot of time, and you know, I believe we live in a white supremacist world, right? So, and does anybody can participate in white supremacy, by the way? It doesn't mean you're white. It means
Yeah.
the standards and norms you have center whiteness. And so, even what my parents would tell me, like, you know, limit a lot of yourself so that you won't be a threat, for example, goes against that. So you're perpetuating that standard and norm. Now they're doing it because of how they grew up. This is not a knock on any of them, but what that ends up doing is that you perpetuate this idea of you have to play by their rules in order to be yourself, instead of you have to be yourself to define your rules. And it's unfortunate because what happens is that the world gets robbed of the actual diversity that exists, or the standards. You know, I remember growing up, I remember my hair is higher than normal, but I never would even think about cutting my hair. I'm growing my hair rather, because in the boarding school and everywhere I went, it was deemed unprofessional. But then you go into different workplaces and then you see people are legislating different hair codes, and when you look at it, it is set to the standard of what, you know, white hair looks like, right? Straighter, you know, you don't have this or don't have the twist or curls. And I'm like, wait, but that's my natural pattern. No one's questioning this. How are we doing this? And it's just those type of things. And even I've seen that happen with sexual orientations and gender identities and all these things that people have considered, you know, I guess taboo in the past, but who determined what they were taboo and all those things. And so I wrote that in to remind people that if they have a dream and if they have something that's written in the imprint of their heart, that they shouldn't be afraid of following it, because sometimes what society is telling you to do by limiting that is based on incomplete information. And if that's the premise, that means that it's already operating at a loss. And the person that you would lose in that sense would be your true self and your identity. So it was just a reminder for us that don't just chase trends at the expense of losing your identity. You can find one.
Yeah. Yes, that's really inspiring actually. But some people are very scared of being themselves because I think it's the sort of the freedom and absolute control. I think that's what scares them. They can be anything they like if they don't follow what you said, you know, white supremacy rules. Yeah.
I think a bigger fear that we don't get talked about is that we don't talk about often is the fear of success. And it's something that I have to ask myself, is because you're right, Anthony. If we become who we say we are, that means what? There are more eyes on us, and then there is also like we have to do what we said, and we have to be held accountable. Now we don't live in a world of accountability as much. I mean, the accountability culture is not where I would like it to be, because I'm certainly not perfect, and there are many moments where I find myself saying, "Oh shoot, I wasn't accountable. I didn't do what I said I would do." Right? It was easy for me to say what I would do, but being held accountable creates a different type of culture than we have today. If you look at, I put this in a tweet as well. If you look at the codes we have today, let's say bro code, girl code, blue wall of silence, right, for police and all these things. Sometimes I'm sure, yes, they're good, but other times it's, yeah, you can't say that. We can't do that. It's against the sisterhood or the brotherhood. And a lot of times what they're protecting is not a good thing. It's the fact that it's the shield versus that and all that. And that type of culture, again, goes back to that thing where we don't allow ourselves to grow because we act like it's not human to make mistakes, and it's not human to either allow for accountability, sometimes punishment when necessary, but also room for growth. And then you have what we have, right? Cancel culture, where sometimes I think it's great, right, if you're calling out the heinous, deeply horrible people, but there are other times where I'm like, we need to allow room for growth, where we can't hold someone to this lowest mistake that they made, because I don't even think you can hold yourself to that standard. But because of the influence that comes to that, it's we get those things mixed up.
Yeah. And can you tell us a bit about your sort of consulting business, strategy consulting business, UYD, so using your difference management. Can you tell us briefly about what you do for those who don't know what you do?
So I run a consulting firm, and my job is essentially to go into these institutions, schools, workplaces, any company that is looking to create infrastructures that allow for effective cross-cultural communication, or look into dismantle systems of oppression. So a company might bring me on if they want to work on de-biasing the organization. They want to work on hiring people from more diverse backgrounds. They want to work on an inclusive leadership. Any of these, or anti-racism. So it ranges from diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, and anti-racism. And I usually go there as a strategist and a consultant. So sometimes they're short-term projects, sometimes they're long-term projects. And it'll be basically to investigate what's happening, and then come up with solutions based on my experience and research. And that comes from that. So that's what I end up doing a lot of times.
Fantastic. And I watched a blog you did where you talked about the starting and the idea and the conception of the idea. And you said that it came from the idea from your podcast. So your podcast, As Told By Nomads, which is on the 569th episode. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So no problem. So the idea came from this. Is it okay to tell us the transitional journey from having the idea and making it happen? Can you tell us this journey?
Well, if you're ready, it's a long story. Okay, let me go back to the genesis. So I remember I said I started to really process a lot of trauma of growing up. First of all, 5 countries, 4 continents, but also there was a lot of blessing from it. But the deepest trauma that I was unlearning from was how much I was losing myself to please others, and also what the dictatorship informed in me. So it happened August 22, 2012. I remember this date. I was driving to work, and I was living in Virginia at the time. It was a year after I had graduated from school. I was living in Virginia. So I was driving my burgundy Toyota Camry to work at the time, going to a place of work that I wasn't a fan of, and I didn't like. And I got to the part where the road merged into the highway, and I was cruising down the lane, and all of a sudden, my lane gets cut into half, and then I'm losing control, and I smash into left guardrail. Boom, 1 car, boom, 2 cars, boom, boom, and then the car hits the left guardrail again with such impact. The car is slightly up and perpendicular. I'm certain I'm about to flip over this bridge, and adrenaline kicks in. Same time, the cliche thing, your life is like, well, what have you done? You're 22. This is what you said you're going to be, this guy to change the world, and you haven't done anything. Nelson Mandela is your biggest influence, and Oprah Winfrey, and you're here. You haven't nothing to show for it. I slammed the brakes on mine and pushed through the car, and I got out of the car. But when I was on the highway, there was zoom, zoom, zoom. 2 other cars were hit, and for some reason, nothing happened to me. My car was completely totaled. It was a mess, but nothing happened to me, and it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call because it was the first time I realized how fickle life could be. I'd seen my dad get shot. I've seen the results of my dad get shot, but he was there in high school because I came back home from boarding school and I saw him, recover from injuries. And I felt something then, but this time it happened to me. And so I was like, what was the biggest shame for me was I didn't have anything that I was proud of to say that I had done. I was in the job I hated, in the city I didn't want to live in. And then I said, I got to change that. And so I started really asking myself those questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And it was always this guy who wanted to fight for the voiceless and people that weren't seen, heard, and understood for who they really were. And I just went down this path of just writing, because writing has always been something I've done. I launched my website. I believe at the time it was TyRocksonSpeaks.com, and then it became TyRockson.com. And I just started writing. Initially, I was just writing about anything, sports, me interviewing, anything that I felt like was more me, because I was searching. But I was just, I made a commitment to continue to do what it is that was authentic. And I would ask myself how I got to where I thought, why I like what I like, who I needed to be around. And the next thing I knew I needed to do was to change my environment, which is what a lot of people don't do. And so if you're not a citizen, you either get married, go to school, or have work. Right. So I wasn't I wasn't married, and the job I was in was not one I wanted to be in. So school was the option. And it also did a dual thing. I don't know if your parents are like this, but when you tell them you're going for a higher degree, you can usually buy time. So me saying I was getting my MBA was a good time for them. And so New York City was the city that I knew made me feel alive. So I applied almost exclusively to schools there, and then I got, I got into one of those schools, even though it was conditional. They told me they could only hire me because my GMAT was low, but I said I don't care, I'm moving in, and because I knew that I wasn't a good standardized test taker, but I was a good student, so I smashed all the goals. I got the 3.9 or 4.0 GPA, 3.9 I think, and then they lifted my conditions and they fully accepted me. But while I was there, I'd been listening to a lot of podcasts, even before the accident then. And I said to myself, why can't I just do this? I mean, I think, not many people know what this is. I'm in school, whatever, start it. And I bought a course on it one weekend, and I started reaching out to people, and I said, hey, I came across this term, third culture kid, TCK, and it feels like it's who I am and who you are based on what you put in bio. I just used hashtag TCK on Twitter, and I saw anyone that identified with that. I was like, hey, you're a TCK, I'm a TCK, let's share the story. And they're like, yeah, I want to share the story more and more. And so that was the initial premise of that, but it gave me ownership of something. So some sports to figuring out all that. But I was listening to other people talk about their identities. I felt more confident talking about my identity, because the first episode, which is not an episode that is the greatest, but I was just rambling about who I was and what I was doing and what I hoped this to be. And then hearing other people feel confident sharing the stories gave me more confidence to share mine, but also confidence to continue. So I would do that in between school. And then someone listened to it from the United World Bank and said, hey, would you consider talking to other diplomatic kids? And I said, yeah, the World Bank, sure. And then I said, oh, so this is like I can speak on this. And so then I started to think, okay, if I can speak on this, I'm going to really, really listen to my listeners and the audiences that I get invited to. So I started to listen to what they were talking about, and it all came down to this identity, belonging, how to create opportunity. And as I was reflecting on things I was doing, and anyone that gets an MBA, there's a lot of case studies and all these things, and I already have a analytical mind anyway, so I was thinking about different frameworks. And so when it came time for me to graduate, I had intentionally not gone to any of the recruiting trips, which was a risky decision. It wasn't a popular decision in my family. People and my classmates thought I was bonkers, but I just believed in it for some reason. And I went down a very, very tricky journey, because I ended up getting fired twice before I actually took the leap. And so it was looking like they were right for a long time. And then I kept putting the podcast episodes and doing my one-off consultants. And then I was able to do enough where I got into a TEDx talk. I did 3 TEDx in 1 year. And then because I've been writing a lot of this, and I started to get testimonials and all that, it became a full-on consultancy. But it was a long, windy journey, because I was trying a few things. The podcast let me know I could speak, and the speaking let me know I could consult, and consulting let me know that I could do this whole time. And so that's how it became what it was.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, life is never a straight line. Never a straight line. Never ever.
Yeah, so you said that you're doing a lot of speaking, and obviously you're a very good communicator. Um, yeah, I personally have a lot of trouble sort of communicating to privileged people that are perhaps a little bit ignorant or oblivious to their privilege. Have you ever sort of talked to someone like this and not been able to sort of get your point across or get through to them? If so, what's your advice for the situation?
This is almost my everyday reality, but because you're bound to come across
Yeah, for
people,
sure.
and even in the public when I'm doing this, especially as a public figure, I get comments or DMs or people trying to figure out what's wrong with me in their own way. But what I say to people is, I like to bring a little nuance to this. I always tell people that you can be simultaneously privileged and marginalized, and also your privilege is not something that you need to be defensive about. It's something you can use to dismantle something of oppression. And so I will start myself. This doesn't always work, but I would say, let me give you an example. So I'm relatively tall, I'm straight, I'm a man, right? Those are some privileges. I'm able-bodied, right? I can use things. Now, at the same time, I've experienced what it's like to have people be xenophobic towards Nigeria. I've experienced what it's like to have people be racist multiple times. I've experienced any range of micro expressions, and those things have happened and have taken away opportunities. And these are those things that are here. One did not eliminate the other, but as a man, I can make sure that I do my best to be a good example for my brothers, and I could stop any sexism that I see in the environments I existed. It's not that I need to regret being a man, it's that I need to use my privilege of being a man to be better and to make sure that the environment I'm in doesn't exist. Now, if I'm doing what you're doing here about race and saying you're not the one that enslaved people, how is that solving the problem? And how is that doing that? And then I'll take them to what I call the PAA. So privilege, access, and action. I always have people list all their privileges, anything they can think of, and then what access it gives them. And then with that access, how does it create, what action item can they commit to? And so if we're going to use man and then access into different rooms without people questioning me or sexualizing me or any of these things, that means that an action I can create is making sure that anytime I come across the quote unquote locker room culture or any of that, using my influence to stop that, making sure I'm even more proactive to make sure that we don't use those sexualizing type of languages and all those demeaning things, or making sure I'm actively not supporting, those movies or stereotypes or things like that. That's an action point. And I always tell people, with the more time we spend doing this and you get defensive, you end up decentering others and continue to center yourself. Because the anger that other people are feeling, even though it's not a nice feeling for you to receive it, it's still justified. But you don't get to use that person as an avatar for how you feel about a whole group of people that have been marginalized. And so you might not like the reaction you're getting, but the better action point is to react and do that, which is why I like that last, that scene we were talking about in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So if anyone has watched it, when when the senator was asking Sam, well, they came back, well, what do we do? You just don't want us to do anything? And Sam was like, this is your job. You still have to do better. There are no clean answers or any of these things. You don't get to just say, well, because of that, I don't know, I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to go back to where it was. You have to continue to actually commit to action in order for us to grow in that way. It doesn't always work, Patrick, but that's what I usually get to. And then I always have my boundaries. And there's some people I just can't reach, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So let's go back to use your difference management. Can you tell us any present or future goals that you have for the company? And if you have any, what are the challenges that are in the way to achieve those goals?
biggest goal with the company is to scale it. I definitely want to build a team of consultants and have it be on multiple continents, like it's meant like a McKinsey or Deloitte. So the biggest challenge with that is honestly, it's been me finding time to create a framework to delegate, which is it's typical for a lot of entrepreneurs. Because initially, when I started this, it's been very, very me focused because I'm the face of the company. Now, as I continue to work on multiple projects, it's me understanding that I need to also create frameworks that allow things that I've created to be replicated, and finding the time to train that. And that is what I'm navigating currently right now. But the biggest goal then is to have just like Deloitte and McKinsey in different parts of the world. I just need to make sure I actually create the time to put together training materials, and then orientation, and then do the recruiting. So yeah.
Oh, awesome. Very ambitious, but all the best.
Hey, yes, very ambitious.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
But there was something I really wanted to ask you. At the beginning, when you're talking about you're growing up in all these different countries, and I love it when you tell stories. I find it really captivating, and I just want to ask you, is there a specific and vivid memory in any of these countries that you still remember to this day? If you can tell us one, if you don't mind sharing.
No, I don't mind. I know when I was that skinny Nigerian kid with a thick Nigerian accent in a French-speaking country in American national school, it was a guy. He's not a bad guy, but middle school people would say things. He came up to me and he pointed to my hair, and he asked me why it grew in a weird way. Basically, he said it was ugly, and it grew up in a ball. And I remember going back home, wanting to make my hair straight. And it was NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. And I was giving my mom examples. I was like, can I look like these people? I wanted to use a relaxer on my hair. And my mom had to explain to me that how different my hair was. And it was 10 or 11. So I was just trying to fit into this very small school that was American. But I remember a lot of stories like that because, at that time, I was pretty sure that I wasn't happy with how I look. I wanted to be lighter or anything closer to whatever, would be considered quote unquote white. And it's something that I know a lot of kids go through today. A lot of people go through without outlets to discuss because of what society standards are and what they don't see enough for themselves in the textbooks or in things that they're watching. And I'm sharing that story because hopefully anyone listening will know that they're not alone in thinking that, because, I'm very proud of my Blackness. I would not want to be anything other than Black. But that, as a kid, it was very confusing for me to find that pride when I didn't see any outlets and it wasn't discussed. And, I grew up in a family that has opened up more and more as I've gotten older, because I'm very, very, I'm an emotional person that likes to talk about emotions, but we weren't allowed to do that back in the culture, because it was like, who does that? That's weak. You don't do that. And so it's taking me a lot of therapy to get here, is what I'm saying. But I don't want anyone thinking that you feeling confused or wanting to talk about it or feeling a lack of self-worth is that. But I had a lot of stories like that though, where I thought that, people would talk about my lips too, like, any nose. I remember I used to go around pursing my lips too. I was trying to get it to like, I didn't know.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, I was trying to do.
I'm so sorry.
No, thank you. I was trying to do so many things because I thought that I wasn't good enough the way I was, and even since no one told me to do those things. I just came up with them myself. So
yeah,
that's the story that I can remember.
It's just the things we do as kids to fit in, right? Just to try to be part of the majority. Yeah. You mentioned, representation, and I think the biggest debate going on in the Asian community is lack of representation or misrepresentation in America. and they're quite dissatisfied with it. What's your attitude towards Black representation in America right now? What's your opinion towards it?
I think there's room for improvement.
Okay.
One of my biggest gripes is, and I love that we're getting more opportunities, is there's a lot of Black joy. My name is Tai, or short for Tai. It means a warrior's brother's joy, or the brave one is brother's joy. And sometimes I think a lot of organizations try to profit off of Black pain. You know, they'll show movies about enslavement or other, people Black folks getting hurt. And I don't know if you feel this about Asian representation. I'm always like, there's so much more. Like, what do you mean? Why can't we just be normal? Why can't it just be, this is a show that's about romance or about this or espionage or all that, and the characters are Black? Why is it always this, right? There's a room for that, but when it becomes the only thing that keeps coming out, it really frustrates me, because this monolithic idea is so different. And so I think there's that, and also just understanding how vast Blackness is, right? The Black culture is so diverse. Me being Nigerian is very different from a Ghanaian or Tanzanian or Kenyan rather, South African or anyone, Egyptian. All these different groups of people, or even an African American in Louisiana, very different from an African American in Texas or a different part. And I don't know that we're doing that yet. I think we're only scratching the surface of really getting beyond just the different subcultures that exist there. And so I'm interested to see what could happen if we explore the mythologies of our history, but also the subcultures that exist there. So there's a lot of room for growth, is what I would say. But I think we're inching in the right direction there.
Yeah, there's some progress. Yeah, some progress.
Some progress.
Yeah.
Is that how do you feel about with the Asian representation? Because you're based, both you, Patrick, you're Singapore?
Yes, yeah.
And Anthony, England, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So when you watch what's happening in the United Kingdom and Singapore and in the US, and you see this Asian representation, what do you feel is missing?
Patrick, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I basically what you said, like, we also live normal lives where we're not like constantly oppressed or something, like, and actually there's a TV show that really that comes to mind. It has John Cho in it, the Asian American actor, with Karen Gillan. I can't remember what the name was. I think it was Selfie. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, I remember that. I didn't watch it, but I remember that. I remember that when it came on. Was it good? I
actually really enjoyed it. Like, I mean, I guess don't take it too seriously. Like, it's a kind of rom-commy kind of show, but it was really refreshing to see, like an Asian actor play just an average person that, like, they never really referenced his race at all. Like, the role could have been played by like an actor of any other color, and it still would have done the same job. And that's what I really, really liked about that. And it's such a shame that show got cancelled.
Oh yeah, I remember. I think it only got one season. I think, right?
Yeah, like 1 or 2 seasons. And then I think Twitter, like, people were photoshopping John Cho's face onto like movie posters or something to try and get him cast in other roles. Because that was I really enjoyed that show. Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if it's been released, but there was a movie with an Asian lead, a rom-com movie with Harry Shum Jr. from Glee, the dancer from Glee.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised when I watched the trailer, because it was an Asian lead with a white girl falling in love with him, which is a formula you would never see at all. And it's always a white guy who's a strong one, the muscly one, and then there's an Asian guy who's almost a sidekick or a side character who gets bullied and who's a nerd, goes to a computer club and stuff like that. And then you have Harry Shum. I think he takes his top off in one scene. And he's like he's muscly and he's a white guy. I was like, yes, this is what. This
You're romantic.
Yes, finally. But I It's I don't know if it's been released, but I mean,
I know what you're talking about. I saw the trailer. I think it came out on Amazon Prime.
I think so. Yes, I think so. But that's not my point. I'm just saying that I think America, when it comes to Asian representation, is slightly ahead of the UK. UK, I haven't seen any British Chinese leads in any dramas at all. Like none at all.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that. And I know that happens. There's that conversation happening with black folks as well, where I know some people will be like, why are black British people coming here to take that? Which I think anyone can, because I've seen it the other way, where a lot of African Americans have played African dictators. I remember, Idi Amin. I remember all these people being played by different people, but I hear that often though. I see it, but I'm not too familiar with the British scene. I know enough, but not enough about the pop culture to know that. So,
But
even though most of my family is British.
Oh.
Yeah, most of my family is British. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of media representation, I think, in terms of British Chinese, well, not just British Chinese, but Chinese widely, I think America is a lot more progressive than the UK, for sure. Yeah, I'm still waiting to see a British Chinese actor or actress playing a lead role here. Yeah, I'm still waiting for that day.
That's unfortunate, and you're right. It just shows we have a lot of work to do, which is what I was talking about, Patrick, earlier. When you're saying we were talking about normalizing trends, I feel like Hollywood, and what's the British version of Hollywood? I don't know if they have a British version.
Really, that's a good question.
I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. I feel like the British film industry. Let me put it that way. But in Hollywood, and everyone is. They probably think in their head there's a formula. That's what you always say. No one's going to buy the movie, so they won't cast. But that's what I mean by trends. If you're going to continue to perpetuate that, you're not going to do anything that's different. And I feel that happens all the time, because that was the story. It doesn't open wide. Who wants to come see any of this? But how? You haven't even given the opportunity, and then you give little. If it happens and then it bombs, it's like, oh, we're not doing it again. But who gets to bomb all the time? It happens all the time. You can't tell me that every single movie with a white lead has always been a hit, but you're not giving them those standards. So what are you measuring these metrics on? So I'm passionate about that. Sorry.
And just to wrap up the episode, what do you think are the West's misconceptions and misunderstandings that they have towards Africa or towards Nigeria specifically?
It's very limited. I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard about Nigerian prince emails, because I got that a lot. You get you and you steal my money and all that. So there was that. I remember coming here, people singing Lion King songs, making clicking sounds. And the thing about that is, there's a tribe, the Hongsa tribe in South Africa, I believe, but you can't use that as a narrative of the whole country. And then not even the way you're speaking about that tribe is like you're making it primitive. It's a big part of it is in everyday life. And so I think a lot of people think it's poverty ridden, it's backwards, it's primitive, and then they have no access to opportunity. And so when I met with surprise, like, oh, your English is so good, or oh, how did you come up with this idea? Like, I mean, how do you come up with your idea? What do you mean? Why are you acting like? Because there's a difference when someone is asking that because they're genuinely curious, but then you can see in someone's face, they're like, whoa, you did this? And I'm like, what? What? That's how I'm always reacting. So I just think people need to understand that humans exist everywhere. Where you're born doesn't mean you're less intelligent. And I think people are still unlearning that, unfortunately, because that's what you hear when someone is saying that. And I don't even think everyone really knows that they're doing that. There's certainly some people that are doing it on purpose, but some people are like, oh, whoa, seriously there? Because people used to be surprised that we had cars in Nigeria when I first came here, or there was a gym, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know how else to explain this to you. It's not just here.
Yeah.
So that's an exposure thing, though. I think that if people really work and expanding their worldview, so their lived experiences and their exposure, they will be able to humanize people more.
So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we found your stories extremely fascinating. And we wish you all the best for UYD management and the future it holds. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Anthony. You two are doing a great job. And thank you for reaching out and giving me an opportunity to share these stories. But I really love what you're doing, and I hope it continues to grow, because I think the more we see faces like yours, the more we understand that the world is truly bigger than us.
Yeah, coming from you, that's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes.